When you have an intended message, that intention is not to say the point. The intention is for them to receive the point. We need to keep that in mind and ask this critical question. If my audience takes away one thing from my presentation today, what is it?
My guest today is Joel Schwartzberg. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Joel. 1, in 1990, he was the national champion in public speaking on the collegiate level. 2, he's a writer. He's a frequent contributor to Harvard Business Review, Inc.com, and Toastmaster Magazine, along with his latest book, Get to the Point, Sharpen Your Message and Make Your Words Matter. Oh, his clients range from include State Farm Insurance, Comedy Central, and the Brennan Center for Justice. So he's got quite a wide breadth there of clientele. And the last fact about Joel is he's partial to rescuing and fostering cats at home. And we'll see if any of them wander into the frame while we're having this conversation. Joel Schwartzberg, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Thank you, George. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really look forward to sharing some good ideas with your audience.
Terrific. In fact, I hope you're going to share more than good ideas. You're going to give us the point.
Right. We're going to get to the point today, if nothing else. But that's the most important thing, so I'm glad we're going to get to it.
And let's start right there, Joel. Let's clarify, what is a point?
Right. So the funny thing about points is we assume we know what one is because we use that language all the time. Get to the point. What's your point? Did you make your point? And it's presumed that it's something like an idea or a topic, maybe even a theme. But the truth of the matter, and what's most instructive and helpful for us, is if we reimagine this word point as something very specific. It's not a topic. It's not a theme. In essence, it's an argument or a proposition. You're basically making a case for something that if you nail it, your audience will think anew, or they'll take an action step that you want them to take. And that only happens when you make this proposition, this argument to them, a case. And you can tell it's a point because you can prove it with data, with storytelling, with reasonability, with all of Aristotle's tools going way back when. But just as an example, because that's a description and I like to really drill down, let's talk about podcasting. So if I said to you, George, or you said to me, I'm going to talk today about podcasting. That's your topic. But what have you told me about podcasting? Is it on the rise or is it becoming antiquated? Is podcasting a good thing or a bad thing? Have there been evolutions in podcasting? Is there a good way to podcast, a bad way to podcast? I have no idea the point you're trying to make if you use the word podcasting. And even if you said the importance of podcasting or the evolution of podcasting, are those things good or bad? Is it going up or down? This is why it's so important to distinguish between a theme and a topic or a point. Now in college, there was a different word we used for point. It was called thesis. We wrote thesis papers. In media training, it's often called a key message. But the basic idea is you are making a case for something and you're proving it. And I do a lot of techniques to help people realize their point, but probably the easiest one is called the XY test. And it basically goes like this. A good point sounds like this. If we do X, Y will result. If we adopt more podcasts, we will be able to attract a valuable millennial audience. See, X is the means by which we get to Y, the impact. And you need to have both, not just the means and not just the impact. So a good point will say, if we do this, this good thing will result.
And Joel, what I'm think I'm detecting there is there's a logic. That's a statement of logic. If this, then that.
Correct. And that actually goes to computer programming too. We call them if-then statements. And there's this quote from Einstein that I always lead my trainings with. And it's, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And that applies to the XY test because we can assume what X is and what Y is, but actually we need to think hard. Because often I find that people's impact statements in that point, the why, is something short of their goal. If you're in a nonprofit that saves lives, you don't want to talk about how why is going to bring more traffic to your website, how why is going to enable you to get more office supplies, or even get more people to write checks. You want to make sure your impact is the biggest, highest value thing you can articulate. In a nonprofit that's saving lives, if it's Coca-Cola, it's selling more Coca-Cola. But this is just an example of how we need to really think hard about what are the means, what's the specific means we're going to get to this highest potential and impactful goal.
Now, I can see making a point there, a logical point there, when it's related to the mission of the organization.
Right.
If we do more of this, we'll achieve a better profit. If we do more of this, we can help more people.
Right. Save the world.
And that sounds, but those are big ideas. What about, are there small points? Can there be a small point?
There can be, as long as they are differentiated. And I'm glad you brought this up, George, because sometimes people think, oh, I have 10 points. I'm going to cram them all like clowns into a Volkswagen at the circus and hope people will get them all. And the problem with that is it doesn't take into account what happens to an audience when they hear these points. When an audience receives multiple points, what happens is they fight each other for attention. And when you have points fighting each other for attention in your mind, they dilute the impact of each other. And something I often say is, if you tell me many things, I will remember none of them. If you tell me some things, I'll remember some of them. And if you tell me one thing, I will remember all of them. So getting back to your question, there can be subpoints. First, I'm going to talk about this. Then I'm going to talk about this. And then we're going to bring it all together and talk about this. And when you tie it all together, the ultimate goal that we're going to try to do here is save more lives. So you see how I brought that umbrella concept back, because I think that resonates with people, especially if they're internal audience. Most of my CEOs, sure, they do keynote speeches at conferences, but very more often they're giving internal town hall speeches, department head meetings. So how do you inspire your team? You get them to think about the big mission. What are we ultimately trying to do here? Not even so much the tiny subpoints that lead to that big goal. And that, I believe that's what really inspires people, that we're all unified toward this one thing, whether you work on a front line or whether you work in accounting.
If a business leader is talking to their team and they want to change a business practice, they want to change a process, something that's more efficient, more effective, and the point is that they want people to adopt the system,
right?
Is it necessary for them to tie this point of changing the system to the big mission?
I believe yes, unequivocally, because ultimately what leaders want to do is engage and inspire. And I picked those two words specifically, engage and inspire. Now you can engage them in a lot of different ways, borrowing again from Aristotle, all the way up to telling stories, keeping them interested. But I believe that the inspire part, and that's the critical part, the inspire part has to do with a shared vision. Why are we all here? Are we all here just to pick up a paycheck? Or are we all here, in addition to that, to accomplish something that will make us feel proud and fulfilled? So if we're adopting a new approach that will make us more efficient, more effective, the question is, going to Simon Sinek, the guru of why? And this is why he preaches why. I think he doesn't get so much at how we articulate the why, but I believe and subscribe to this idea of the why is important. Because that's what galvanizes your team. That's what keeps them coming back and enthusiastic about their jobs.
Joel, what about in a business meeting, a team meeting, where there might be agenda, and there are usually a list of agenda items which typically are not even related to each other? How does one make, if one's speaking to one of those items, how does one make a point that resonates on a bigger level?
Well, I think it goes back to the agenda. And I've done some writing on meeting agendas, and I think they're often written poorly. Now, you could Google meeting agendas and get 1,000 ideas. But for me, there's one critical one. And that is that don't load up your agenda, at least from the leader's point of view. An agenda for the group, it can have topics on it so they could follow the table of contents. But the leader should have a sort of version of that agenda that has points on it. What is the point I want to make that addresses this topic? So we're not meeting our fourth quarter goal. That's the topic. What is the point I want to make? We need to cut these programs and reemphasize these programs. That's my point. So if a leader, to break it down, if a leader goes in with a topic, they may ramble, they may bury their point, they may not communicate their point. But if a leader in preparation for that meeting attaches a point to each one of those topics, then they can ensure that they're making points, and only points move people. When you have topics, you're just sort of addressing something, throwing it out there, saying, we're going to talk about this. I'll throw out some ideas. You throw out some ideas, maybe magically, fingers crossed, that we'll get to an action step. Maybe, hey, we're just talking. We're just talking. This is why I sometimes talk about magic words. Magic words are, instead of saying, let's talk about this, the magic words are, I recommend, I propose, I suggest. You cannot say, I recommend ... without making a recommendation. Same thing with a proposal or a suggestion. This is why I recommend these word choices. So it forces you to make a point. I mean, what gets more attention from a leader than, here's what I recommend we do? Now, we can discuss it, we can tweak it, but that's a leadership role, not just to say, I'm going to throw this out there for discussion, but here's what I recommend, or here's what I'm proposing now. Let's discuss.
Do you have a critical presentation coming up? One that can influence the direction of your career or business? How can you be ready to give it your best? Contact me. I'm George Torok, the speech coach for executives. Together, we can create and polish a superior presentation that will get you your desired results.
Is a point best when it's action-oriented?
I believe it is. The best points have what's sometimes called WIIFM. I believe that's the acronym. What's in it for me? But like a good email, it should end with an action step. Here's what I propose we do. And for a leader, when you say, I believe that if we do X, Y will result, baked into that X is the mechanism and the means for getting there. So I believe that if we pull our focus from these R&D projects and put more emphasis on retaining our audience and listening to them, then that's, a proposal of action that they're doing. So it comes down to that X. That's why the X is so important. If a leader just says, I believe that we will have a better fourth quarter, or our goal is to have a more profitable fourth quarter. Well, that's the why without the X. So that's why the X is so important, to get at what you're saying, George, that action step. How do we get there?
Sometimes, especially in a meeting, the managers or VPs are simply delivering a report. They're making a report.
Right.
Here's
Status
the
report.
personnel report. Here's the financial report. Here's the production report. And so my question is, what's the point of those?
There is none. I look at a lot of PowerPoints, George, and what bothers me the most is they are book reports. How often do you hear a presentation that says, here's a history of the thing. Here's where the thing is now. Here's many people we need for the thing. Here's how we're investing in the thing. And here's how our teams are going to be organized to accomplish the thing. All right, well, thank you. But why are we doing the thing? What's the purpose of the thing? And again, it's boring without that, because that's the inspirational piece that's so critical. Why are we doing this? And that is the point. I had a client who sold a lot of collateral material. She sold pamphlets and calendars and hats and pins. And I said, give me your best point. And she said, okay, you see this pin? I can give you this pin with your logo on it, 2-color, and it's perfect because it's a magnet. It's not a thing that'll cause blood. It won't stick you. And this hat, a giraffe could step on this hat and it won't crush, and blah, blah, blah. And she finished. And I said, do you think you made your point? And she said, I absolutely did. I described each of my products and what's great about them. And I said, you know what I never heard? I never heard you say that if I buy your product, I will be more successful. And that was her point. And she was too busy describing her inventory. And that's what people often do in their presentations. And it's like what you described there, the status report. Here's where things are. That's my book report. And I know I'm going on about this, but I'll give you one more metaphor that I think is useful. In a book, there are two things. There are a lot of things in a book, but two things that are always there are a table of contents and the blurbs in the back of the book. A point is the blurbs. A description of inventory is the table of contents. Don't be the table of contents person. Be the blurber. Everybody with a point is in sales. Sometimes that depresses people I talk to, but we're all in sales. A point can be as valuable, even more valuable than a product. So that's why we need to sell it, not just share it.
A point is a sales proposition?
Yeah, it's a sales proposition. You're trying to sell people to believe in your point so much that they're going to think anew, like I said, or take an action. And that is how I define impact.
And I imagine a point that is subtle or obscure is not a good point.
Right. Sometimes people think, well, if I make it cryptic, or if I save it to the end, like I'm going to spoil a movie if I bring it out early, that will engage my audience. And that's a mistake. You're not there to entertain your audience. You're not a juggler. You're not a magician. You're not singing. It's not about you. It's not about people even thinking you're great. And this is a big one I often get with my clients. I say, what's your goal? My goal is for my boss to think I'm a great public speaker. And I say, because you want more public speaking gigs? Because that's what you're looking for if you say that. And what I try to tell people is that it's not a performance, it's a presentation. And there's a big difference between the two. We even say when we're giving a speech or a presentation, what's the word we use? We deliver it. And in that word is the guidance that you just have to move your idea from here to there, from your mind to their minds. If you do that, even if imperfectly, even if there's a stain on your shirt, you succeed. But if people remember, oh, Joel was great, or George gives a fantastic presentation. He's funny, he's interesting. Well, what was George's point that day? I don't remember, but boy, I can't wait to hear from him again. That's a fail because your job was to deliver the point, not to make people think a certain way about you.
So let's look at a presentation. Let's say it runs 30 to 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Are you suggesting that there needs to be one key point to the whole presentation?
There does. It doesn't mean that you can only convey one point. Just do it one at a time. But let's go back to the audience again. And audience is critical. You know this when you have an intended message, that intention is not to say the point. The intention is for them to receive the point. Now, if you've been to a presentation in the audience and you're not taking copious notes or tweeting, how much of that do you actually take away? 2 things, 3 things, 4 things? And by that, I mean 2 things. We need to keep that in mind and ask this critical question. If my audience takes away one thing from my presentation today, what is it? I identify it and then I reverse engineer it so that my presentation is designed to leave that with their audience by repeating that point, by reinforcing it, by proving it with subpoints. So yes, I think every good presentation should have one point, one clear takeaway that the presenter intends for the audience to take away. But they can use a lot of approaches and subpoints to make sure that big point is remembered, is the one they come away with. Ultimately, you don't want your audience coming away with that slide that was about a history of the organization. So you need to prioritize and put emphasis where it needs to be.
That woman that was selling you the pin and the hat
Right.
didn't it wasn't an effective point because she didn't address your needs.
Right.
And the point, is it clear that the point, when we're forming the point, should address the needs of the audience, of the listener?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought this up, George, because people can nod their head at that. But then they write a speech as if it's the opposite, that it's all about what you say. And with the CEOs and the leaders I work with, they start with the wrong question. They start with a question: what do I want to say? What should I say today? What should I say to my team? Wrong question. Right question: what does my audience, my team, what do they want and need to hear? And I'm very careful with the words I choose. So when I say want and need, I pick those specifically because those are two different things. When an audience wants something, it means they already know about it, but they want more elaboration, more details. They want to be convinced of it, but there's a general knowledge. When they need to know something, it's often something they don't know about, and you want to inform or educate or enlighten them. So you ask those two questions: what do my audience want and need? And then you reverse engineer it so that your presentation meets those needs. If there's something new that you're going to be saying, then there are tactics you can choose in the conveyance of that point so that they match your audience's wants and needs. But you're 100% right, George. If there's a disconnect between what you're saying and what they want and need to hear, then that is the definition of tone deaf.
And I can see that there can be cases where their wants and needs will differ, will conflict.
Mm-hmm. And there are ways that a CEO leader should go about finding out those wants and needs. They shouldn't assume them. So how can we do this? We can have engagement surveys. The leader can reach out to the people team or the HR team. They should reach out to their department heads. Do the job of discovery that will let you know what's going on in your organization. And there's, what you may find is that there's a lot of differentiation, but then you consult with your department heads, you consult with the people team, so that what you put out has that connection, or a lot of that connection, or even the acknowledgement that I know that there's a lot of differentiation in how people are responding to the new program. And I want to address that as a point unto itself, because I believe that the more viewpoints we add to something and we accept, the better the product will be as a result of those multiple points of view and experiences. So and I'm only offering that as an example, but the differentiation of views out there, that can be a point unto itself. So the leader comes across as someone who's listening, who understands and is in touch with what's going on with the organization.
And I imagine in that case, it would be helpful if the leader were to use a phrase of, "Here's what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I've learned over the past 2 weeks." To acknowledge, here's what's going on, and here's what I'm hearing from you, or here's what the rumor mill's saying, or here's what the survey said, and then they need to address the needs related to that.
Right. What builds trust in a leader? I often say truth builds trust, authenticity builds trust, but also listening builds trust. So not only this is what I've heard, but I've been going around the country on a listening tour, and this is what I've learned. A CEO I work with at the end of every town hall stands up and says, over the last 2 hours of presentations, I was listening, and this is what I learned from you. So it's not only this general, this is what I've heard, as if it's on the grapevine, but I've made it a priority to go out, to take this time to listen to you and learn to you, maybe through your department heads, so that what we're doing here as an executive team is responsive to what you need as an audience and as an organization.
Now, it's curious. I had a recent case where it was an exchange of emails,
Mhm.
And a supplier was doing some work for me, and I wasn't satisfied with the end result. And I told
Mhm.
them that, but they came back and told me, yeah, but what about all this other stuff we did? No, no, no. This is what's important to me.
Right, right,
and
right.
and I read that and I was angry because they didn't recognize what was important to me.
Right, right. And that, I often say when I talk about the role of a presenter to present their point, I go back to what is a teacher's job? Is a teacher's job to be seen as a great teacher who does teacherly things, or is it to educate these students? What does a plumber do? Does a plumber work to make sure you love the plumbing service and they have credibility? No, you want them to fix your pipes. So at the end of the day, whether it's like what you said, George, about working with a vendor or speaking to an audience or speaking to a partner, it's so critical that the presenter identifies the point so that everyone's on the same page. They understand that point, and they're unified toward that goal. And, if you're a student of project management, in the official version of that, and I just took a 2-day project management course, so this is why it's in my brain. There's a lot of talk about getting people on the same page, getting people unified toward the one goal that's attached to an impact, a goal that we all agree on, even sign off on. And that's the way to success, getting everyone on the same page with, like I said, that XY. What is the X that we're going to do that's going to lead to the Y that we want?
And what happens when there is conflict about that connection between X and Y? When
Hmm.
when the audience doesn't believe it,
Mm-hmm.
what do you do? Do you change your logic, or
I would say it's always think of it in the form of a proposal and not a mandate, unless you're sure that this is where we're going to do X and it'll lead to Y. No, I propose based on everything we've learned that we do X and will lead to Y. Now, this is my first proposal of this to this team, and I really welcome your feedback so we can discuss it. So you're making the point, but you're also opening up the door to opportunity to tweak it, to make sense of it. Audiences and teams and internally, they love to be involved. What do teams complain most about in an employee engagement survey? That they're not considered in the decisions of leadership. So how do you consider them? You consider them, but that doesn't mean you don't go in without a point. And you say, it's a big brainstorm. I don't know what we're doing. Who's got an idea? That's a recipe for disaster. But you go and saying, here's what I propose. And George, when you're brainstorming something, you want to start with an idea and improve that idea. You don't want to start with a blank screen or a blank page.
and okay, so let's look at that brainstorming
Right,
session where instead of going in and saying, okay, any suggestions?
right.
We need to start somewhere. We need to have some idea, some kernel to start with.
Yeah, definitely. So that's where you make your point. Even if you're just brainstorming what we used to call a name storm at Nickelodeon, or just brainstorming names, have five versions to start with, because understand that your audience, it's easier for them to address something that exists than something that doesn't exist. It's like, what do comedians hate most? When you go up to them and say something funny, you're a comedian. It's similar. Give people the opportunity to respond to something. And this is why when presenters are on Zoom and they use chat, the best thing to say is not, you got any feedback to what I want to say, to what I just said? Throw it in chat. You'll get crickets. But if you say, here are 3 things in chat, tell me which one do you think will be the most impactful. Now we're voting, and everyone is excited about voting. They love to vote, particularly if it's in chat. And there are a lot of things about using Zoom and chat that are elevations of way and get the response that we want versus get the crickets that we don't want. And I love to share those as well. But that's one of them. Give people choices, give them ideas to respond to, not ask them to respond to nothingness.
And what I'm hearing there, Joel, is to be tangible, to be specific.
Right. The more specific you are, think of it as sticky. The more specific, the more sticky. And the more sticky, the more people will respond to it, and the more they will remember it. Remember what we talked about. What's the one thing they will take away? They're more likely to take away a specific thing than a general thing. And by the way, human beings, what I found in my point making presentations is that human beings are more responsive to points that end with impacts on living things than non-living things. So for example, if our point ends with, if we do this right, we're going to be able to build more facilities, or we're going to be able to service our many constituencies, versus we're going to help people access healthcare. We're going to make people happier. We're going to simplify their lives. Those are more resonant because they end with an impact on a living thing. And whether you're working for profit or nonprofit, surely there's a way you can connect what you're doing to a beneficial impact on somebody's life, or a society's life, or an animal's life. And if you can do that, choose it, because that will resonate more with human beings. That's what we respond to.
And Joel, I'm hearing guidelines here that an individual can apply throughout their conversation, throughout their presentation. It's
Right.
not just I got a point. No. Apply these
beginning,
guidelines.
middle, end, reinforce it. What do we know about remembering things in presentations? We often remember the first thing and the last thing. So that's critical. Remember, it's not a movie where you're going to spoil the ending. Bring out your point. Today, I want to talk to you and show you why. If we do X, Y will result. And at the end, we've talked a lot today, and I hope you've learned a lot. I want you to reach out to me later. But if you take one thing away, and you could even use this language, if you take one thing away, it's this: I believe that. And I use those words sometimes. I believe that if we do X, Y will result. Remember, your job is to take that thing away, not for them to remember you. And nobody ever comes away from a presentation thinking, well, George was terrific, but you know what? He made his point too many times. I heard too much about your intended message. Nobody will say that, because that's the prize. That's the gift that you're giving your audience. So you can say it again and again, maybe in slightly different ways, because your goal is for them to remember it and to take it away.
Joel, as we prepare to wrap up, a reminder to people of your book, Get to the Point, Sharpen Your Message and Make Your Words Matter. And you can find that at all the bookstores. Also, for those who are interested in training directly with you, they can find you through your website, joelschwartzberg.net. And again, that link is in the description below. Joel, as we prepare to close, if you could sit down with a team leader that's heading into a meeting during a time of crisis, what, if you could give them 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice to help them lead that meeting and get out of the crisis, what might be that 1, 2, or 3 points you might give?
I would say the first point is know the point you're trying to make, and realize that you're not in the obstacle/challenge description business. You're in the solution business. And this is maybe one of the most important things, because often leaders will spend their time talking about how bad a crisis this is, as if to assuage their own guilt about it or to put a silver lining on it. But what do leaders do? What does a captain of a boat that's sinking do? Nobody wants that captain to describe how high the water is getting. They want to describe how we're going to get to dry land and what we're going to do to get there. Similarly, a leader is expected to point in the direction of getting around this, of responding to it. If there's no way around it, how are we going to mitigate the damage? That's what they want from a leader, and that's their point. Now, the second thing I would say is, and 2 more magic words: rest assured. Rest assured. I love to give nuts and bolts like language and tips and tools. When you say, and I don't mean for the leader to try to appear phony or try to be strategic about it, so only if it's true. But if you lead with rest assured, that relaxes people to some degree, because it communicates 2 things. 1, we're all in this together and we're all feeling it together. And 2, there is something we can hang our hat on. There's something that we can feel is going to be there at the end of the day, no matter what happens. Rest assured communicates that. So I use that as a proposal of language that leaders can use to unify people and also to give them some sense of permanence, no matter what happens.
My guest today is Joel Schwartzberg, reminding you that if you only take one thing away, be sure to be clear of your point.
If you like what you heard, remember to like, comment, and share this podcast. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you convey your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.